So Chiro Gold today here with Dr. Joe Strauss, and I'm excited today. We're going to change things up a bit. One of the things I mentioned on previous visits with Dr. Joe about his knowledge about Christianity. In fact, he's written a fantastic book on the subject, which I have right here, The Nature of Man, a really just incredibly well-written book as it applies to Christianity. And so in addition to his knowledge in chiropractic, he's studied this extensively his entire life. And so today we're going to get into that and just to change the pace. But when you get down to it, chiropractic philosophy is very important, and we have a very important message to share with the public. But really, in the big picture of things, it isn't as important as what we're going to be talking about today. As Dr. Joe is going to go over and discuss with us today in the parable, the story with the Good Samaritan, is the question to be answered is, how do you gain eternal life? And when it comes to the big questions in life, that's the big one. How do we spend eternity? And that's something we don't want to mess up. And so it's very important that we discuss this and hear some wisdom from Dr. Joe on the subject. So I'm excited for this. So, Dr. Joe?
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. I find it interesting that this passage we're going to be looking at today in Luke chapter 10, verse 25-37, discusses the idea of physical life or an absence of physical life with a lawyer who came to Jesus and asked him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And the first thing Jesus said was, "What's written in the law?" And he replied, what is written in the law? He replied, "How do you read it?" Jesus asked him, "How do you read the law?" And I guess we could say the same thing about the law of chiropractic. How do you interpret the law of chiropractic? And of course, if we ask anybody about that, they would probably have to go back to the laws that were written to define and delineate chiropractic.
Mm-hmm.
When I was first started chiropractic school, those laws were written in the state of Pennsylvania and didn't in any way look like chiropractic that most chiropractors practice today,
Right.
which in fact they have kind of mixed chiropractic and the practice of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the problem that we have today, and what we're trying to do in our approach to objective chiropractic. And so Jesus said, "What's written in the law? How do you read it?" And the lawyer said, "Love the Lord your God," verse 26. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus replied, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." I'm sure if we ask that question to medical doctors or a medical school or at a chiropractic school, the answer we get would probably be either treat diseases, or in most chiropractic schools or most medical schools would be to treat diseases, or if at a medical school it would probably be take care of bad backs and stiff necks, and neither of which would apply to the way we practice chiropractic, and neither of which would apply to the story that Jesus is going to relate in explaining this parable of the Good Samaritan. and and he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And that was the way he wanted to get into the topic of who is my neighbor. Now, I'll give you a slight background in that situation. The Jews and the Samaritans were not on friendly terms. In fact, they very much disliked each other. And I guess if we could we could apply those principles to chiropractic, we would say that the Samaritans were the mixers of the Judaism, and they had mixed Judaism with things that they had gotten from the religions that had surrounded them, and some of which had conquered them over the years. So there was not a lot of love between the Samaritans and the Hebrews, or the Jewish people, and so that's probably where Jesus is coming from. And I think it's interesting that he takes the position of a good Samaritan. So the Samaritans would necessarily dislike the Jews, just like the Jews disliked the Samaritans.
Right.
And he takes the position of a Samaritan, and he takes this story from the Samaritan's viewpoint. And so the lawyer who's talking to Jesus at this particular time, he quotes the Shema, which is something that the Jews still quote today, and basically it says that, and Jesus says, "Well, you've answered correctly," and I think that the lawyer was trying to say that he really thought that his neighbor was another Israelite, another Jew, rather than a Samaritan, because he wouldn't have wanted to
finally.
Right. He wouldn't have wanted to say that they were his neighbors. He said the Jews were his neighbors, and of course they looked down upon the Samaritans, just like they looked down upon the Romans and any other Gentile person. They were looked down upon by the Israelites, and so Jesus proceeds then to tell this story of the Good Samaritan. So Jesus is putting this Samaritan in a positive light, and relating this story to a fellow who would ordinarily be antagonistic toward Samaritans or non-Jewish people. And so Jesus says, "Well, who is your neighbor, and who is your neighbor?" And this causes the lawyer to kind of think, well, who's his neighbor? And I think that this situation with chiropractic is, if we were asked, well, who is our neighbor that we should take care of in chiropractic, probably the best response we would get from the medical profession would be anybody who has a bad back or a stiff neck.
Right.
Or we probably would get from most chiropractors, anybody who has any kind of diseases. And of course, that's not the answer that we would have as chiropractors. And that's not the answer that I gave the students at Jefferson when I took the position that what we do as chiropractors, we presented chiropractic rather than from the law, but not put the medical school on the defensive and come in and say, well, we take care of anything that is a disease. I related directly to the subluxation. And what we do in chiropractic is correct vertebral subluxations. That's our objective in the approach of chiropractic we have. And we don't. First, I will explain a little bit about how the body does to heal itself, and that the body has the ability to heal itself, in many situations. And that was something, you could relate that to a medical doctor, because he knows that under most circumstances the body is going to heal itself. And
Hmm.
when it gets to the point that it can't heal itself, which is it's past the point of limitations of matter,
Right.
that some intervention is needed. And of course, I talked about the fact that that intervention may be some other area of healing arts, the so-called healing arts, but it's not chiropractic, and
Right.
that we correct vertebral subluxations to
Hmm.
allow the body to work better, if it possibly can. And so that was the approach that I took with the students at medical
Right.
school, and that's the approach that I took at a few chiropractic schools that I went to also, especially chiropractic schools that had begun to mix medical procedures with the procedures in chiropractic. So that was the idea that I had, and the principle that I wanted to get
Hmm.
across to these medical students. We wanted to meet those students where they were, and acknowledge the role that they played in the so-called healing arts, and the role that we played in the so-called healing arts,
Right.
and the fact that those two roles are not in conflict. So there's no animosity that exists with our approach to chiropractic
Right.
and the medical approach to chiropractic. Both of us serve a function, serve a purpose, serve a role, but we have different objectives,
Yes.
and we stick to strictly what is our objective, and
Hmm.
we leave any other objective to them, whatever that the person
Right.
wants to be met as their objective. And that's why when people would come into my office, I explain what my objective is, and say, well, if you want this, fine. If you want something else, if you want somebody just to treat your symptoms, or to alleviate your symptoms, or to find out what's the cause of your symptoms, then you need to go
Hmm.
to a medical doctor. You need to go to somebody
Right.
else besides us. That's not something that we do in our office. And so that would be made clear to the person before I would even accept them as a practice member in the
Right.
in the office. And many times people would say, well, I do want to find out what's causing my problem. And I'd say, fine, there are medical doctors around that are competent and are able to give you that information.
Hmm.
Uh, but you may also need to have your subluxations corrected. And I think that the putting himself in the position of the Good
Samaritan.
Samaritan, I think Jesus was saying, "This is what I have
Yeah.
for you,
Yeah.
eternal life, and that's what you need." He was
Yeah.
he was using the Samaritans, who would be relating to an individual physical needs. He was relating that to what they needed from a physical basis. And if the story is that this man who was traveling down from Jericho to Jerusalem was set upon by robbers, and was beaten and left for dead,
Right.
and along the road, and and a Levite, a Jewish uh, priest, walked upon him, and just walked on the other side of the road and
Mhm.
passed him by. and then uh, and then if other persons passing by also. And then this Samaritan, who should have, disliked him, should not have even cared for him at all. This Samaritan came and ministered to his physical needs,
Right.
and even took him to an inn and put him up for the night, and said to the innkeeper, if there's any other costs, to take care of this man, and address his needs. If there's any other needs that he has, let me know when I return, and I'll give you the money for it.
Yeah.
And so the Samaritan was acting in a way that was totally unusual for a priest or an Israelite to act, and yet he was acting in a gracious, loving, and kind way.
Yeah.
And I think that the message that Jesus was putting forth was that he was the good Samaritan, as far as the Christian message that was in the passage. And I think the message for us is, as far as chiropractors is concerned, is that we provide a service for people. It's not a eternal life service, but it's a physical life service that
Right.
they need, and we will address that, and that's what we address as chiropractors. If people have other needs, then we refer those people out, and of
Right.
course the thing is that we don't necessarily know what that need is, whether it's surgery or medicine or first aid, as was the case in this man who was set about by robbers. He needed first aid,
Right.
but what he needed was not what chiropractic gives people, and not what chiropractic provides for people. And so that was the message, I think, that we can take as chiropractic in applying this message to the practice of chiropractic.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And you see in this message here too, talking about the Good Samaritan and how that applies to what we do in chiropractic. You've got this, like you said, this message. He's providing a need for this person that he met. And let me back up. What I was thinking about earlier, when the Jewish priest asked Jesus, "How do you gain eternal life?" and he told them those two things: love God, um, and then love your neighbor as you do yourself. And then he asked, "Who was my neighbor?" And like you mentioned, I think that he was hoping he would just say the Jewish person, because that's the easy thing to do. I can do that. He's thinking, but I have to be a nice person and kind to everyone else. I don't want to do that. And so Jesus's point was that your neighbor is everybody. And for us in chiropractic, like you were saying, it's the same way. When it comes to who we serve, who our neighbor is, the people we help, it's really anybody. It's everybody who has a spine, because it's likely they're subluxated. I guess it's technically anybody who has a subluxation, but most people are. So it's not just the back pain people, the easy thing that some chiropractors want to hear. It's everybody. Our neighbor in chiropractic is the whole world, because everyone needs what we have. Everybody is better off with that full expression of life in their body than otherwise. So I think that's a great analogy you've got there.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we note that we do not address every single problem that an individual has, but every individual, whatever problem they need to have their spines checked to see if they have a subluxation. If they don't have a subluxation in their spine, and they have other needs at that particular moment, then we need to acknowledge that those needs are not in our area of expertise, and they may need to go to a medical doctor to find what those needs are. And and I think that the issue may be very well identified as the need that a person who is who wants the care of a non-objective chiropractor, or
Hmm.
what is commonly known as a mixed chiropractic, it the issue would be very much the same as a person going to a medical doctor,
Yeah.
because most chiropractors, or many chiropractors, are trying to fill the role of a medical doctor, and we're saying, oh, we don't fill that role.
Yeah.
That's an important role, but there is a role that we fill, and everyone needs to have their spine checked to see if they have that need too,
Mm.
what else they need, and like the Good Samaritan was saying, I can't treat this person,
Right.
their problem, and he left them under the care
Right. Yes.
of the innkeeper, and said, do whatever to see this guy gets whatever he needs.
Yeah.
And what we would do as chiropractors is like, see, you need to see somebody else to find out what your
Right.
own needs are,
Yeah.
but this is what you do need in that
Right.
particular. There was a
Yeah.
need for first aid, and that's the application that was to us. Those are things that we don't provide for
Right.
people.
Yeah. The Good Samaritan in this case, he wasn't bandaging his wounds or doing anything like that. He was just helping to make sure he got to the right person. And for us, we don't want to. Our job isn't to necessarily get them to a specific, specialist, but we just say, hey, you might want to check that out. And I think personally, for me, I feel comfortable just saying, go check out your, if you need to, go to your general practitioner and let them make that decision on what needs to be what has to happen from there, and where they can then, go and have that person let them know what specialist they need to go see if they decide to do something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I told you that story of my having a physical problem and thinking it was an eye problem, and going to
Right.
an ophthalmologist, and he said
Yeah.
he wouldn't even. He said, "There's nothing wrong with your eye. I checked it out." And he said, "There's something else." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, go to a medical doctor,
Yeah.
or call your medical doctor and let him decide."
Yeah.
And he determined I should go to the hospital and have it checked out. And it was
Hmm.
a serious problem that I had at the time, and
Hmm.
I needed special care for it. And but that care wouldn't have come from a chiropractor, and
Right.
it came from somebody else. But he wouldn't even check it out. He said, even though he was an ophthalmologist and a medical doctor at the same time, but he would not check it out because his specialty was the eye, and
Yeah.
he said, nothing wrong with your eye. And
Yeah.
so it's important that we understand what our limitations are and what our limitations are not,
Hmm.
and what our role is and what our role is not, and what our expertise is and what our expertise is
Right.
not. Expertise is in objective straight chiropractic is not the diagnosis and the treatment of disease. That we leave up to some other professional.
Yeah.
Now, professional is a medical doctor, or if that professional happens to be a chiropractor who feels he has the expertise to do that,
Hmm.
then that's fine. And I guess that we need to acknowledge that there are people that, even if they are what we would call in our profession mixers, uh, we need to give them the right to do that, and not try to encroach upon that area, or the medical area. And that's I think the message for me. I know there was a time in my career that uh, I, I I had some animus toward chiropractors, uh, and toward medical doctors. When I first went into chiropractic, I had uh, I put them in a position of dislike. They were not my neighbor, so to speak,
Sure.
and
Right.
I
Right.
wasn't about to have anything to do with them. And then I got to the point where I said, once I established what my objective was, what my mission was, and what my mission was not, then I was able to accept medical doctors and
Mm-hmm.
take that position when I went to that medical school to speak at Jefferson, and also when I went to mixing chiropractic schools to speak. And I have to admit that I was more warmly received at the Jefferson Medical College than I was at the chiropractic at most chiropractic colleges, because I made it clear, and somehow they were able to grasp the fact that my objective was not the same as their objective,
Right.
and I was acknowledging the validity of their objective, uh, and
And they, of
but
course, respected that. They respected that you weren't trying to be a second-rate medical doctor, which is really what it is. When a chiropractor attempts to be a medical doctor, it's second-rate, maybe third-rate at best, because we just don't have the same schooling, the same tools at our disposal, the diagnostic equipment, all that kind of stuff. So obviously, yeah, it makes sense that they would respect that. And it's unfortunate that you had the opposite response at a chiropractic school, but that just goes to show you that they somehow feel the need to try to become that second-rate or third-rate medical doctor. So
yeah, that they feel that they're in competition with them,
right.
and as soon as I made clear that this was not competition that I had with the medical doctor,
Yeah.
they understood that, and they accepted that. And I did have to explain to them that, that I believe that that's what we do, and that's the only thing that we do is as objective straight chiropractors,
Mm-hmm.
and that and some of them had a difficult understanding why they couldn't do that, and why that wouldn't fit into their area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
They might be able to check an individual out and see if there's a broken bone
Yeah.
or some kind of traumatic injury to the spine, but that's not what we do, and
Right.
that's still an area that they their expertise is in, and but we do feel that people need to have their spine checked on a regular
Right.
basis,
Right.
and that's the role and the mission that we
Mm-hmm.
have to fill, and most of them were able to grasp that because they realize that they don't have the expertise to do that. Some of them do, and I've spoken to a few osteopathic doctors, and most of them uh, got that grasp of that because they realize that that's not the area that they have now. They may have tried to do that years ago and may have tried to do what a chiropractor does, but nowadays they really only practice medicine, and so they understand that that's not their area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And but but the chiropractic school students, they thought, well, they could do both,
Yeah.
and they I don't feel that I have the ability to do both,
Yeah.
and that's not my role, and
No.
so they needed to understand, and I thought it was easier to explain that to medical students than it was to explain to chiropractic students,
Yeah.
because the medical students understand that that's not their area, and they don't want that to be their area.
Right.
Uh, they don't want to do to fill that role
Right.
in with taking care of people,
Yeah.
and so that was
Well, I was actually reading one of your books this weekend, Higher Ground, and in there, one of the chapters you talk about striving for excellence. And I think that is missing in a lot of ways in our profession. And one of them is just that desire to, the reason it's lacking is because there's a great desire to try to be a medical doctor and a chiropractor at the same time. And of course, you can't do that for a lot of reasons. But one of them is the result of that effort is you're going to be like I just said, mediocre at best at either of those. You can't be excellent at those two things. And so I just think we have to have that desire. Let's be great at something. We don't want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. Let's be a master at something. And that takes a lifetime of effort and energy and time to do so, as as you are a great example that you're still studying these things and still learning today. So that desire to be really excellent at one thing is unfortunately missing, I think. Not maybe just today, but probably if we go back in time, there's always been that rare person who really wants to be excellent at something. We need to have more of those people, though, in chiropractic who want to be excellent chiropractors. And,
Yeah, I think that most chiropractors don't have they don't have either the pride in what they do and the need to do that as well as they possibly can, and so they incorporate other things into their practice rather than say, I want to be the best chiropractor I can be.
right,
And of course, to do that, you have to study, you have to know the principles in which chiropractic are built, and the limitations of what you have, those self-imposed limitations. And unfortunately, when we first began as a profession, those limitations were placed upon the profession by the medical community, and they said that this is what you can do as a chiropractor, and this is what you can't do as a chiropractor. And then chiropractors began to try to broaden those laws to enable them to do the things that they wanted to do, and things that were really best done by other members of the so-called healing arts or other professionals.
right.
And so that's why in today we have chiropractors all over the country are doing all kinds of things that don't even resemble the practice of chiropractic, and states that are even trying to enable chiropractors to have the right to prescribe
Yeah,
pharmaceuticals, and in fact most of our profession has stood up and decried that that objective
mm,
and that mission and
right.
that role of chiropractors,
Yeah,
and so, but slowly they're trying to
yeah. Too often
get,
it's the vocal minority that that's in those positions trying to change those types of things. So
yeah, and and they're, and unfortunately they're gaining some area of success. And
hmm
I think that in 1976 we established that that the prerequisite to doing all of those things was in the area of diagnosis. And so that's why we took the position that we don't, as chiropractors, we do not diagnose medical conditions, don't diagnose medical problems, and
right,
don't determine what medical problem an individual has. And therefore there's no reason for us to get into the area of trying to treat those things either
hmm
medically or chiropractically.
right,
And that's why we say that it's your objective that's important, and that chiropractors should not have the objective of treating medical conditions, even if it's trying to treat a medical condition by adjusting the spine.
right.
That's technically not the practice of chiropractic, because you still are changing your objective,
hmm
and our objective should begin and end with the correction of vertebral subluxation to
right,
enable the innate intelligence of the body to work closer to its full capacity. Where
right.
anybody needs only that, uh, if that's all they need, then we can supply that need.
hmm
If they need something else beside that, then
right.
they need to go to a chiropractor and somebody else to
Yeah.
have those other needs met. And I
hmm
think that was that was the area that I seemed to have a problem when I went to Jefferson Medical School. But that problem was really with the faculty members who sat in on the class,
Yeah.
and they they couldn't seem to grasp that idea that we do have a role in society, and we want to stick to our
Yeah.
role. Students seem to grasp it, and but the some of the professors that were sitting in that room didn't seem to
They're
grasp that.
stuck in their ways.
Yes, yes, and they had already had that vision of a chiropractor who was a quack who wanted to cure everything,
Right.
and
Right.
and and when I tried to explain uh, to them that, well, we don't cure anything, we allow the body to work a little bit better by removing interference in the nervous system, and that's the role that we play,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the
Yeah.
role that the Good Samaritan was doing, and
Yeah.
he knew what his role was to uh, give that individual the first aid that they needed, and then give them to the innkeeper and said, whatever else he needs, see
Yeah.
that he gets that, and if there's any additional cost, I'll I'll help meet that cost and that need, and if there's any additional cost, but that's not something I'm going to do. So
Mm-hmm.
the Good Samaritan um, was knowing what his role was and knowing what the limitations of his role was, and also knowing that whatever else that person needed, he was going to supply that.
Right.
And I think that was the message that that Christ was trying to get across to those uh, that lawyer that he was speaking to, was saying that, hey, I've come to meet the eternal needs of an individual, and
Mm.
that's my role,
Right.
and I'm not going to do anything else, even though he had the ability to do those other things.
Yeah.
And on occasions, he did them only to demonstrate who he was. That he was the individual. He was the
Right.
individual who had the ability to meet every need. We chiropractors recognize that we don't have the ability to meet every need, uh,
Well, that's a
and
great example right there. Here we have Jesus, who has, he is God. He has the ability to do anything, and yet he's allowing other people to fulfill certain needs and to supply certain needs. And he's doing his one most important job, of that eternal need, fulfilling that. And so for us as chiropractors, man, what better example than that, to follow, where we don't have to supply every single need or fulfill every single need. Let's just do what we're put here to do. What our purpose is as chiropractors is to allow the body's innate intelligence to express itself better, and be okay and understand that other people are here to be good Samaritans in their own way as well. And so that's such a great insight you have there. I never would have thought of that, but how Jesus has the ability to do anything, yet he reserves, and except for in some rare examples and some cases like you mentioned, but he's supplying his one need and allowing other people to do other things.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So I think that's a great lesson for the day, and a great um, example for us to follow. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up today. Any final thoughts?
Well, I think that we need to cause people to think, and whether we're talking to a chiropractor who has a different approach to chiropractic, just think about what we do as chiropractors, what our limitations are,
Yeah.
what our acknowledgement of people's other limitations are, and what other people can do. We also need to recognize the fact that we don't supply people's spiritual needs,
Right.
and
Right.
and we don't supply many of their physical needs, other than correcting subluxations,
Right.
and we allow the people who can do that. Uh, so I come from a family of people who are either chiropractors or missionaries or pastors, clergymen, and I allow them to do their role, and I just stick to my role as a chiropractor to correcting subluxations, and don't try to get into their area of expertise unless I have the opportunity to, on a personal basis, to share my faith with them, and I'm perfectly willing to do that with people, but that's not my major calling in life. I have a brother-in-law and a sister who are missionaries, and three or four cousins who are missionaries, and one just got a call from the other day. He's in Turkey now, and I don't know how much longer he's going to stay there because the country is becoming a little bit antagonistic toward what he's trying to do. But he may have to leave there soon. But that he recognizes that he has a role, and that his role is not to correct subluxations, and he's leaving that up to me. And when he comes back into this country, I checked his spine when he was on a furlough from the countries that he was at. He was in Afghanistan for a while, and he was in Albania for a while, and he was in Lesotho, which is a country that's stuck in the middle of South Africa. And in fact, it was the $1 million question on who wants to be a millionaire. And
really?
When they asked the question, I knew what the answer was because my cousin was a missionary
there. Funny.
But I wasn't up for the million. I was watching on TV. That's yeah. But I think that we need to use illustrations and examples and metaphors, and we need to do them. And that's why I thought this was so good, because it was Jesus' approach to present the principle that he was trying to get across to this individual, and he was using metaphors and examples and parables to help explain what he was doing. And I think that we need to do that. And of course, he's the best person in his humanity that was ever able to get across that message to people. And that when we can use examples ourselves to try to explain what we do to people, and I think we never have to worry about if we're explaining truth. And I think the principles of chiropractic are a truth that never hurts to present them to people, and we never have to worry about making the wrong decisions as far as presenting those principles, because they are principles too, and they're based upon the principle that this God-given ability for the body to heal itself and to function at a higher capacity by removing interference within limitations is an important function that we have, and that's the principle and the truth that we try to present in chiropractic. And I think that leads people to accept other principles and other truths that are existent. And that's why there's so many chiropractors that I've had experience with who have accepted the truth of their faith and understood that, and it's become more meaningful to them as chiropractors, and I think it has for me. And that truth that I have based upon chiropractic helped to cement and to strengthen the faith that I have as a Christian.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing this. And and what's so great, you mentioned how Jesus is able to clearly get his message across through these stories. And you've done a similar thing in chiropractic. You've been a truly master at being able to communicate the truth of chiropractic. So just love and appreciate you for doing that and taking the time, as always, to share with us. And we've got a lot here to think about. So thanks again.
The opportunity, and I hope to, the Lord willing, doing it more.
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you.